SCIFI-HFY said, his tentacles writhing in exasperation. 500 years and you're telling me the solution was a paperclip. The human technician Jake couldn't help but grin as he twirled said paperclip between his fingers. What can I say? Sometimes the simplest solutions are the best. SCIFI-HFY's eye stalks twitched, a clear sign of annoyance in Glorpian body language. But we've had the brightest minds of the Galactic Federation working on this problem for centuries. How could they have missed something so primitive? Jake shrugged, his grin widening. Maybe that's exactly why they missed it. Sometimes you need a fresh perspective, or in this case a species that hasn't quite given up on good old-fashioned ingenuity in favor of fancy schmancy tech. The ancient alien elevator hummed to life behind them, its doors sliding open with a satisfying whoosh for the first time in half a millennium. The gathered crowd of aliens, a motley crew of tentacles, appendages and sensory organs that would make a Lovecraftian horror look positively mundane, let out a collective gasp. "Well, I'll be a Zorgon's uncle," muttered a particularly wrinkly alien that looked like a cross between a prune and a jellyfish. "It actually works." Jake couldn't resist a little showboating. He bowed with a flourish, paperclip held high. "Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted genderless beings, I give you the miracle of human engineering." A ripple of laughter, or what passed for laughter among the various species, spread through the crowd. SCIFI-HFY, however, was not amused. "This is preposterous," he sputtered, his tentacles now tied in knots. "We can't possibly admit that a monkey solved our most perplexing engineering challenge with office supplies." Jake raised an eyebrow. "First of all, rude. We prefer the term highly evolved primates. Thank you very much. Secondly, why not? Seems to me like you folks could use a little humility. Maybe broaden your horizons a bit? Yeah?" A murmur of agreement ran through the crowd. SCIFI-HFY's eye stalks drooped in defeat. "Fine," he grumbled, "but don't expect me to like it." "Wouldn't dream of it, buddy," Jake said, patting the alien on what he hoped was a shoulder. "Now, who wants to take this bad boy for a spin?" The crowd surged forward, eager to experience the long-forbidden joy of vertical transportation. As Jake watched the aliens pile into the elevator, he couldn't help but chuckle. Who would have thought that humanity's first major contribution to galactic society would be fixing an elevator with a paperclip? But then again, maybe that was exactly the kind of outside-the-box thinking the universe needed. 24 hours earlier, Jake had been minding his own business, tinkering with the quantum flux capacitor on his beat-up spaceship, which he'd affectionately named Rusty Bucket, when the distress call came in. "Attention all sentient beings within range," the message crackled through his comm system. "This is an urgent request from the Galactic Federation. We are in dire need of assistance with a technical issue." Jake snorted. "Technical issue, my ass. Probably some bigwig alien forgot their password again." But curiosity got the better of him, and he accepted the call. The holographic image of a harried-looking Glorpian flickered to life in front of him. Jake recognized the species from his xenobiology classes. All tentacles and eye stalks, with a penchant for bureaucracy that would make even the employee blush. "Greetings," the Glorpian squinted at something off-screen. "Rusty Bucket, is that your designation?" Jake chuckled. "Nah, that's my ship. Name's Jake. What can I do for you tentacles?" The Glorpian bristled. "I am SCIFI-HFY, Chief Engineer of the Galactic Federation's Historical Preservation Committee, and we have a situation of utmost importance that requires immediate attention." All right, keep your tentacles on," Jake said, holding up his hands in mock surrender. "What's the big emergency?" SCIFI-HFY took a deep breath, or whatever passed for breathing among Glorpians. "We have a malfunctioning elevator." Jake blinked. "Come again?" "An elevator, a vertical transportation device. It's stuck." "Yeah, I know what an elevator is," Jake said, rolling his eyes. "But you're telling me the almighty Galactic Federation is putting out distress calls for a broken elevator?" SCIFI-HFY's eye stalks drooped. "It's not just any elevator. It's the ancient elevator of Zorbax Prime, a relic of immense historical and cultural significance. And it's been non-functional for approximately 500 of your Earth years." Jake whistled. "That's one hell of a maintenance backlog. What happened? Did you forget to pay the repair guy?" "This is no laughing matter," SCIFI-HFY snapped. "We've had our finest minds working on this problem for centuries. The elevator is constructed of materials unknown to modern science, powered by energies we can barely comprehend. It's a masterpiece of engineering from a long-lost civilization, and its continued malfunction is a source of great shame for the Federation." Jake leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips. And you're calling little old me because? Zixilorp's tentacles writhed in what Jake assumed was the Glorpian equivalent of a shrug. We've exhausted all other options. Your species has a reputation for unorthodox problem-solving. We thought perhaps a human perspective might yield new insights. Aha, Jake said, stroking his chin thoughtfully. And what's in it for me? The eternal gratitude of the Galactic Federation, of course, Zexilorp declared grandly. Jake raised an eyebrow. Silorp deflated slightly, and a substantial reward in credits, precious metals, or the currency of your choice. Now we're talking, Jake grinned. All right, Tentacles, you've got yourself a deal. Send me the coordinates, and I'll see what I can do about your ancient alien elevator. As the hologram flickered out, Jake couldn't help but laugh. An elevator stuck for 500 years. This was either going to be the easiest job of his life or a complete disaster. Either way, it was bound to be interesting. Little did he know just how interesting things were about to get. The arrival. Jake's ship, the Rusty Bucket, lived up to its name as it sputtered and clanked its way into the docking bay of the massive space station orbiting Zorbax Prime. As he maneuvered into the designated landing spot, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of embarrassment at the stark contrast between his battered vessel and the sleek, shimmering ships surrounding it. Well, girl, he patted the console affectionately, at least you got us here in one piece. Mostly. As the docking clamps engaged with a series of whirring creaks and groans, Jake gathered his tools, a battered old toolbox that had seen better days, but had never let him down. He slung it over his shoulder and made his way to the airlock, taking a deep breath before cycling through. The moment he stepped onto the station, he was assaulted by a cacophony of sights, sounds, and smells that threatened to overwhelm his senses. Aliens of every conceivable shape and size bustled about, their languages a dizzying mix of clixels and undulating tones. The air was thick with a mixture of exotic scents, some pleasantly spicy, others decidedly less so. Right, Jake muttered to himself, find the stuck elevator. How hard can it be? As if on cue, a familiar tangle of tentacles and eye stalks came barreling through the crowd. Zexilorp, looking even more frazzled in person, skidded to a halt in front of Jake. You made it, the Glorpian exclaimed, eye stalks swiveling wildly. We were beginning to worry. Your, vessel's approach was rather erratic. Jake patted his toolbox. She might not look like much, but she's got it where it counts. Now where's this elevator of yours? Silorp's tentacles twisted in what Jake was beginning to recognize as a nervous gesture. Ah yes, about that. There's been a slight complication. Jake groaned inwardly. Of course there has. What now? For you see, Zixilorp began, leading Jake through the crowded concourse, news of your arrival has spread rather quickly. And well, there's quite a crowd gathered at the elevator. As they rounded a corner, Jake's jaw dropped. Quite a crowd was the understatement of the millennium. The entire atrium was packed with aliens of every description, all craning their necks, or equivalent appendages, to get a glimpse of the ancient elevator, and presumably the human who was supposed to fix it. Oh boy, Jake muttered. No pressure or anything. Zixilorp's eye stalks drooped apologetically. I'm afraid your task has become something of a spectacle. The eyes of the entire Galactic Federation are upon us. Jake squared his shoulders, a mischievous glint in his eye. Well then, let's give him a show, shall we? With that, he began to push his way through the crowd, Zixilorp trailing behind him like a worried parent. The sea of aliens parted before him, a mix of curiosity and skepticism evident in their various facial expressions, for those that had faces at least. As they approached the elevator, Jake got his first good look at the ancient machine. It was underwhelming, to say the least. A simple set of metal doors set into an otherwise unremarkable wall. The only indication of its supposed grandeur was a series of intricate, swirling patterns etched into the metal, patterns that seemed to shift and change as he looked at them. Ha, Jake said, reaching out to trace one of the patterns with his finger. Neat trick. Zixilorp nearly had a conniption. Please don't touch it. The patterns are highly sensitive to. But it was too late. The moment Jake's finger made contact with the metal, the entire elevator lit up like a Christmas tree. The patterns blazed with an otherworldly light, and a low hum filled the air. The crowd gasped in unison. Jake pulled his hand back as if he'd been burned. Oops! Zixilorp's tentacles were now so tightly knotted that Jake feared the poor alien might never untangle them. What have you done? The Glorpian wailed. But before Jake could answer, the elevator doors slid open with a soft whoosh, revealing absolutely nothing. The interior of the elevator was a void, a darkness so complete it seemed to swallow light itself. Jake peered into the inky blackness, then looked back at Zixilorp with a grin. "Well, would you look at that? I fixed your elevator." The crowd erupted into a frenzy of excited chatter. Zixilorp, however, looked like he was about to faint. If Glorpians could faint, that is. "This is impossible," Zixilorp muttered. "We've tried everything. Quantum resonance fields, tachyon particle beams, even good old-fashioned percussive maintenance. How did you?" Jake shrugged, his grin widening. "Sometimes all it takes is the right touch. Now who wants to take the first ride?" The crowd fell silent, all eyes and various other sensory organs turning to the gaping void of the elevator. Suddenly, no one seemed quite so eager to test out the ancient machine. Jake sighed. "All right, I guess it's up to me then. For science and all that jazz." As he stepped towards the elevator, Zixilorp's tentacles shot out, wrapping around Jake's arm. "Wait, we don't know if it's safe. The elevator could lead anywhere, another dimension, the heart of a sun, the stomach of an ancient space beast." Jake gently pried the tentacles off his arm. "Only one way to find out, tentacles. Besides, isn't this what you hired me for?" With a wink and a salute to the stunned crowd, Jake stepped into the darkness. The last thing he saw before the doors closed was Zixilorp's eye stalks widening in horror. And then nothing. Nothing. The void. Jake had expected many things when he stepped into the ancient alien elevator. A trip to an exotic alien world, perhaps. Or maybe a journey through time and space. Hell, he'd even braced himself for the possibility of instant disintegration. What he hadn't expected was this. Nothingness. Absolute, complete nothingness. He couldn't see, couldn't hear, couldn't feel. It was as if he'd been plunged into a sensory deprivation tank, except even the sensation of floating was absent. For all he knew, he no longer had a body at all. Well, Jake thought to himself, or at least he assumed he was thinking, it was hard to tell in this void, this is anticlimactic. We tried to move, to speak, to do anything, but there was no response. It was as if the universe itself had ceased to exist, leaving only his consciousness floating in an endless sea of nothing. "Hello?" he called out, or tried to. No sound emerged, no vibration of vocal cords, if he even still had vocal cords. "Is this thing on?" "Hello, customer service? I'd like to report a faulty elevator, please." Silence, not even an echo. Jake began to wonder if this was some sort of cosmic joke. Had he inadvertently stepped into some kind of interdimensional waiting room? Was this what happened when you divided by zero? Just as he was starting to consider the possibility that he'd be trapped in this void for eternity, and boy, wouldn't that be a fun way to spend the rest of existence, something changed. At first, it was so subtle he thought he might be imagining it. A faint glimmer in the darkness, like a star viewed from the depths of space. Then another, and another, until the void was filled with pinpricks of light. "Oh, pretty," Jake mused. "Is this the part where I see my life flash before my eyes? Because I've got to say, I was hoping for something a bit more exciting, maybe with explosions." But the lights weren't showing him his life. Instead, they began to coalesce, forming patterns and shapes. Slowly, painfully slowly, an image began to take form. It was a paperclip. Jake would have blinked in confusion if he'd been sure he still had eyelids. A paperclip. So of all the profound cosmic secrets this ancient alien elevator could have shown him, it chose office supplies. But as he focused on the image, he began to understand. The paperclip wasn't just a random object, it was a key, a solution. The answer to a 500-year-old problem. "You've got to be kidding me," Jake thought, a mixture of amusement and disbelief washing over him. All this time, all those fancy alien scientists, and the fix was something you could find in any office drawer. The irony was delicious, the simplicity beautiful. It was so perfectly, ridiculously human that Jake couldn't help but laugh, or whatever passed for laughter in this bodiless state. And with that laugh, everything changed. The void shattered like glass, reality rushing back in a dizzying whirl of sensation. Jake found himself stumbling out of the elevator, gasping for breath, his legs wobbling like a newborn giraffe's. A crowd of aliens jumped back in surprise, a chorus of startled exclamations filling the air. Zixilorp, who had apparently been pacing the trench in the floor, whirled around, eye stalks nearly tying themselves in knots. "You're alive," the Glorpian exclaimed, tentacles flailing wildly. "We thought you were gone forever. It's been hours." Jake steadied himself against the wall, his head spinning. Hours felt like minutes, or maybe centuries. Time's funny that way. He looked up at the elevator, which was now humming contentedly, its doors closed in patterns glowing softly. Well, Jake said, straightening up and dusting himself off. Good news and bad news, folks. The crowd leaned in, a mix of anticipation and dread on their alien faces. The good news is, I know how to fix your elevator. A ripple of excitement ran through the assembled beings. Zexalorp's eye stalks perked up hopefully. The bad news is, Jake continued, a wry smile playing on his lips, you're not going to like it. Zexalorp's tentacles twisted anxiously. What do you mean? What did you see in there? Jake reached into his pocket, fishing around for a moment before pulling out a small, bent piece of metal. He held it up triumphantly. Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted non-binary extraterrestrials, I give you the solution to your 500-year-old problem. A paperclip. The silence that followed was so profound you could have heard a pin drop, or in this case, a paperclip. Zexalorp was the first to break it, his voice a mix of confusion and indignation. A what? A paperclip, Jake repeated, twirling the little metal object between his fingers. Simple Earth office supply, used to hold papers together, pick locks, and apparently fix ancient alien elevators. The crowd erupted into a cacophony of voices, some skeptical, some outraged, and some just plain bewildered. Zexalorp looked like he was about to have an aneurysm, assuming Glorpians could have aneurysms. This is preposterous. The alien sputtered. You expect us to believe that the key to unlocking the secrets of this ancient technology is a primitive earth-fastening device? Jake shrugged. Hey, don't shoot the messenger. I'm just telling you what the magic elevator void showed me. Besides, what have you got to lose? It's not like your fancy alien tech has done the trick so far. Zexalorp's tentacles writhed in frustration. But how? Where would we even insert a paperclip into this advanced machinery? Jake stepped up to the elevator, examining the intricate patterns on its surface more closely. Now that he knew what to look for, he could see it, a tiny, almost imperceptible slot, hidden within the swirling design. Right here, he said, pointing it out. See? It's like the world's most overcomplicated keyhole. The crowd pressed closer, a forest of eye stalks, tentacles, and various sensory appendages all straining to get a better look. Zexalorp peered at the spot Jake had indicated, his expression a mix of disbelief and reluctant curiosity. I suppose it could be a sort of access port, the Glorpian admitted grudgingly. But surely it can't be that simple. Jake grinned. Only one way to find out. He held up the paperclip. Shall we give it a try? Zexalorp hesitated, his tentacles twisting into knots. The fate of a 50-year-old mystery, the pride of the Galactic Federation, and possibly his entire career all hung in the balance. And it all came down to a bent piece of metal from Earth. Finally, the alien sighed in resignation. Very well, proceed. The crowd held its collective breath, or whatever passed for breathing among the various species present, as Jake carefully straightened out the paperclip and inserted it into the tiny slot. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like 1,000 wind chimes all ringing at once, the patterns on the elevator's surface began to shift and dance. The hum that had been present since Jake's first touch grew louder, taking on a musical quality. The air itself seemed to vibrate with energy. Jake stepped back, a mixture of awe and smug satisfaction on his face. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we have liftoff. The elevator doors slid open with a soft whoosh, revealing an interior that was decidedly not an empty void. Instead, it was a marvel of alien engineering, sleek, gleaming surfaces covered in pulsing lights and holographic displays. It looked like something out of a sci-fi fever dream. The crowd gasped in unison. Zexalorp's stalks were rotating so fast they were in danger of unscrewing themselves. It's operational, the Glorpian whispered in disbelief. After all this time. Jake clapped him on what he hoped was a shoulder. See, sometimes the simplest solutions are the best. Now, who wants to take this baby for a spin? The excitement in the atrium was palpable. Aliens of all shapes and sizes began clamoring to be the first to ride in the newly awakened elevator. Jake found himself being patted on the back and various other body parts by a multitude of appreciative appendages. As the first brave volunteers piled into the elevator, Jake couldn't help but chuckle. Who would have thought that humanity's first major contribution to galactic society would be fixing an elevator with a paperclip? But then again, maybe that was exactly the kind of outside-the-box thinking the universe needed. The aftermath. Word of Jake's unconventional solution spread through the space station like wildfire, or whatever the alien equivalent of wildfire was. Zexalorp had mentioned something about rapidly propagating quantum entanglement fields, but Jake had tuned out after the first few syllables. that within hours the story had been picked up by every major news outlet in the Galactic Federation. Holographic headlines blazed across the station. Human engineer solves 500-year-old mystery with primitive tool. Paperclip diplomacy, Earth's first galactic triumph. IS office supplies the key to unlocking the universe's secrets. Jake found himself thrust into the spotlight, surrounded by a swarm of alien reporters all clamoring for an interview. He did his best to field their questions, which ranged from the technical, "Can you explain the quantum mechanics behind your solution?" to the absurd, "Is it true that humans keep miniature black holes in their pockets for emergency situations?" Through it all, Jake maintained his cool, answering with a mix of self-deprecating humor and genuine wonder at the situation he found himself in. "Look," he said to one particularly persistent Zygonian reporter, who resembled nothing so much as a sentient fern with eyeballs, "I'm just a guy who's good with his hands and thinks outside the box." Or inside the very tiny box in this case. He held up the now famous paperclip with a grin. Meanwhile, Zexalorp was busy dealing with the political fallout. The Galactic Federation's Historical Preservation Committee was in an uproar, torn between jubilation at the elevator's restoration and embarrassment at being outsmarted by a primitive species. Jake found the Glorpian in a quiet corner of the station, tentacles tied in so many knots it looked like he'd tried to crochet himself. "Hey, Tentacles," Jake said, plopping down next to him. "How's it hanging? Or writhing, I guess, in your case." Zexalorp's eye stalks swiveled towards him, radiating a mix of gratitude and exasperation. "It's been challenging," the alien admitted. "The committee is simultaneously planning a galaxy-wide celebration and drafting new regulations to prevent future embarrassing incidents involving primitive technologies." Jake snorted. "Let me guess, they're banning paperclips." "Among other things," Zexalorp sighed. "There's talk of establishing a new research division dedicated to studying Earth office supplies for potential applications in advanced alien tech." "Well, wait till they hear about sticky notes," Jake grinned. "They'll really lose their minds then." Despite himself, Zexalorp let out a sound that might have been a chuckle. "I must admit, Jake, when I first contacted you, I never imagined this." He gestured vaguely with a tentacle, encompassing the chaos of the station. Jake leaned back, a thoughtful expression on his face. "You know, I've been thinking about that. Why did you reach out to a human in the first place? Surely there are plenty of other alien species out there with unorthodox problem-solving skills." Zexalorp was quiet for a moment, his tentacles writhing thoughtfully. "There are legends," he said finally, "passed down through generations of Galactic Federation historians. Stories of a species known for their unpredictability, their ability to find solutions where none should exist." Jake raised an eyebrow. "You're telling me humans are some kind of galactic urban legend?" "Not just humans," Zexalorp clarified. "Earth itself. Your planet has long been a subject of fascination and fear among the older races. A world of contradictions capable of great beauty and terrible destruction, of profound wisdom and utter foolishness." "Sounds about right," Jake muttered. "There are those who believe that Earth holds the key to unlocking the greatest mysteries of the universe," Zexalorp continued, "and others who fear that very same potential." Jake whistled low. "That's a lot of pressure to put on a species that still can't agree on whether pineapple belongs on pizza." Zexalorp's eye stalks twisted in confusion. "I don't understand that reference, but I sense it's a contentious issue among your people." "You have no idea," Jake laughed. "But seriously, is that why you called me? Because of some ancient alien prophecy about Earth's potential?" Zexalorp's tentacles waved in a gesture that might have been a shrug, partially. "But mostly we were desperate. And sometimes desperation leads to the most unexpected solutions." Jake nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "Well, I'm glad I could help, even if it was just with a paperclip." "It wasn't just a paperclip," Zexalorp said softly. "It was a reminder that sometimes the simplest answers are the most profound, that wisdom can come from the most unexpected places." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, watching the bustle of the station around them. Aliens of all shapes and sizes hurried past, many of them sneaking glances at the unlikely pair, the tentacled bureaucrat and the human handyman who had solved an ancient mystery. Finally, Jake stood up, stretching. "Well, Tentacles, it's been fun, but I should probably be heading back to Earth. I've got a leaky faucet waiting for me that's probably flooded my entire apartment by now." Zexalorp's eye stalks perked up. "Actually, about that, the Galactic Federation has a proposition for you." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Oh, let me guess, they want me to go around the galaxy, fixing ancient alien tech with Earth office supplies. The paperclip repairman at your service." To his surprise, SCIFI-HFY nodded enthusiastically. Something like that, yes. We believe your unique perspective could be invaluable in solving other long-standing galactic mysteries. Jake blinked, momentarily at a loss for words. You're serious? Absolutely, SCIFI-HFY said, his tentacles waving excitedly. Think of it as a cultural exchange program. You share your human ingenuity with us, and in return you get to explore the wonders of the galaxy. For a moment, Jake was tempted to laugh it off, to say it was crazy and head back to his mundane life on Earth. But then he thought about the adventure he'd just had, the thrill of solving an ancient alien puzzle with nothing but a paperclip in his wits. A slow grin spread across his face. You know what, Tentacles? You've got yourself a deal. But on one condition. SCIFI-HFY's eye stalks quivered with anticipation. Name it. Jake's grin widened. We upgrade my ship. If I'm going to be gallivanting across the cosmos solving alien problems, I can't do it in something called the Rusty Bucket. SCIFI-HFY's tentacles waved in what Jake was beginning to recognize as the Glorpian equivalent of a laugh. I think that can be arranged. Welcome aboard, Jake. I have a feeling this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship and a new chapter in galactic history. As they shook hands, or rather Jake shook SCIFI-HFY's tentacle, neither of them could have predicted the adventures that lay ahead. But one thing was certain, the galaxy would never be the same now that humanity had made its mark. And it all started with a paperclip. 1 year later, Jake stood at the viewport of his new ship, the Ingenious Monkey, a name he'd chosen partly out of spite, and partly because it made SCIFI-HFY's eye stalks twitch every time he heard it, gazing out at the swirling nebula before him. The colors were unlike anything he'd ever seen on Earth, shades of purple and green that seemed to dance and pulse with an inner light. Beautiful, isn't it? Came a familiar voice behind him. Jake turned to see SCIFI-HFY gliding into the room, tentacles swaying gently. Never gets old, Jake agreed with a grin. So what's our next mission, Tentacles? Another stuck elevator? Maybe a cosmic vending machine that won't give up its snacks? SCIFI-HFY's eye stalks rotated in what Jake had come to recognize as the Glorpian version of an eye roll. Your fixation on food dispensing machines is concerning, Jake. But no, this is something different. Jake's eyebrows shot up. Different how? Because let me tell you, after that incident with the sentient black hole that just wanted a hug, my definition of different has gotten pretty broad. SCIFI-HFY's tentacles writhed in what might have been embarrassment. Yes, well, this time we've received a distress call from the edge of known space. A colony ship thousands of years old has suddenly reactivated. Its inhabitants are awakening from stasis, but, Jake prompted, already feeling the familiar tingle of excitement that came with a new puzzle. But they seem to be speaking in a language no one in the Galactic Federation can understand. And their ship's systems are, well, let's just say they make your paperclip solution look positively high-tech. Jake whistled low. Sounds like my kind of challenge. Any ideas what we're dealing with? SCIFI-HFY hesitated, his eye stalks quivering slightly. There are theories. Some of our historians believe this might be a lost colony ship from Earth's ancient past. Jake's jaw dropped. You're kidding. You mean to tell me there are other humans out there? Ancient humans. It's just a theory, SCIFI-HFY cautioned. But if it's true, well, it could rewrite galactic history as we know it. Jake stood there for a moment, processing the implications. Then, slowly, a grin spread across his face. Well then, Tentacles, what are we waiting for? Let's go make some history. As the ingenious monkey changed course, its engines humming with power that would have made the Rusty Bucket green with envy, Jake couldn't help but marvel at the turn his life had taken. From a small-time handyman on Earth to a galactic problem solver, all because of a stuck elevator and a paperclip. He patted his pocket, where he always kept a spare paperclip, just in case. Never know when you might need to save the galaxy, he murmured to himself with a chuckle. As they sped towards their next adventure, Jake realized that in solving the mystery of the ancient alien elevator, he'd unlocked something far greater, humanity's place in the vast, weird, wonderful universe. And he couldn't wait to see what the cosmos had in store for them next. The end, or perhaps just the beginning?